Okay. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm here as the equity topic lead to provide sort of an update on what I'm working on and how I think it might intersect with OMSC's sort of more modeling focused view. I think I bring this up at every meeting. I'm kind of coming more from the demography and GIS background and trying to find the intersection always with modeling. So I'm not as much a transportation modeler myself, but trying to find that intersection. And a lot of the data that I'm working with, I think, ends up potentially being useful for the types of work that you all are doing. Um, I do apologize. Around 11, I need to hop off to another presentation. That's how I like to do it, is just have back-to-back presentations in my day. So yeah, let's dive in. Focusing on equity indicators with a little bit of review at the end, just of sort of other efforts that Metro is doing in this realm. So Metro background on equity indicators. How time flies. So about 10 years ago, Metro put out an equity baseline report, which fed into the strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And during that process, there was sort of an identification of a bunch of different indicators that would potentially be useful to sort of track over time, if possible. 10 subject areas, approximately 100 indicators identified. Some efforts have been undertaken to kind of put these into map form and allow these to be publicly available. And so DRC, a lot of acronyms in my talk, apologies. Data Resource Center, where I work in the planning department, sort of the GIS shop. Regional Equity Atlas in 2012, Economic Value Atlas in 2018, Regional Barometer in 2019, Social Vulnerability Explorer in 2022, beta version of the Quick Facts Viewer currently, and our list demography is just an ongoing effort to provide demographic data to ourselves and to the public for use and analysis. Existing R-list demographics, there's a lot in there, a lot of indicators, as you can see, a lot of subject areas kind of being covered here. Plenty of room for more subjects to be covered, which is sort of part of the process of research that I'm highlighting today. Lots of geographies as well, block and block group when available for different indicators, depending on reliability. Track level data, sub-county, county. When you get up to the county, you start being able to do more kind of cross tabulations of indicators because you're able to minimize the margins of error. So we can start looking at things like race and ethnicity, cross-tabbed with education, or cross-tabbed with income, or tenure, or home ownership. And for some applications, doing sort of custom dosimetric estimates for the geographies that don't match to census geographies, so UGB, metro jurisdiction, MPA, or metropolitan planning area, council districts. So that's kind of the landscape within which this research is being undertaken. And the current effort is to go back to that equity baseline report from about 10 years ago, review and identify sources for those approximately 100 indicators, and kind of break them into tiers. What's on the shelf, either on our shelf or someone else's shelf, and is pretty much easy to grab and evaluate and put out there. What needs significant or fair amount of research or analysis to evaluate its usefulness or reliability. And then there's plenty of indicators that were identified that just kind of have a question mark. And you know, honestly, it was a little bit of kind of a wish list effort. Like these would be the things that would potentially be of interest to study about our communities, but not exactly sure where to find the data or if the data is available. So that's kind of how we've gone about tiering that. That work is largely done across the indicator. So now we're kind of going out and doing a little bit sort of more in-depth evaluation. Considerations sort of against the RLIS backdrop. Again, RLIS is the Regional Land Information System. That's the 150 or 200 data layers that Metro puts out for the region. The considerations that are always there, no matter the layer, is reliability, whether that's methodological or statistical reliability of the data, as well as institutional reliability. How much do we trust that this data is going to continue to be available, and how much can we feel like this is something worth the effort of continuing to publish. And then the other piece of it is just usefulness. How well does the indicator help us understand the communities and the people that we're trying to serve, right? So the subject areas that were identified in that baseline report, a whole bunch of them: cultural, economic, educational, environmental, food, health, housing, meaningful engagement and empowered communities, restorative justice, transportation. And so kind of starting perhaps related to transportation modeling. This is me going out on a little GIS limb here and trying to connect the dots with the modeling world, right? And think a little bit creatively about the demographic data that I'm in touch with. So naturally, I kind of zeroed in on the transportation subject area that was identified. But as it kind of turned out, this tended to be focused more on small area type indicators, and I wasn't quite sure of how much this would translate to being useful for the modeling world. Things like public transit reliability and frequency, transit proximity to job, school, household, sidewalk, bike network connectivity, curb cuts, unpaved roads, cost burden of transportation, crash data. And so kind of a question mark for me there of how much of this translates to the OMSC world. But moving into another subject area that seemed like there was a couple that were sort of categorized as economic equity that also had a transportation lens: transportation to jobs and transportation to schools. With the jobs, I've worked quite a bit with the LEHD data, or longitudinal employer household dynamics data, published by the census available at block level. Includes information about the origin and destination. So what block does the person live in, and what block do they work in? So that huge matrix of information, and sort of understanding the flows. And that can be further segmented by the age of the worker, broad categories of income, broad categories of job type based on NAICS codes. If you look just at worker area data or resident area data, sort of segmented away from the origin destination, you get a lot more granularity, including some other demographic information like race and ethnicity. But the origin destination definitely seems to be a piece that could potentially be of interest to folks, especially at the granularity that it's available at. And then transportation to schools, this is kind of where I was getting a little adventurous with my thinking. We know where the schools are. We have that in our list. We know where the school attendance boundaries are. A little up in the air about who's going to potentially be maintaining that data going forward. It has been the state, but trying to sort of figure that piece out. And we know where the housing units are, so we know in a pretty small area, where people are traveling from to get to school, and could that sort of travel cost consideration be built into some sort of modeling structure. Granted, it's not perfect because people do go to schools outside of their attendance boundaries, but it might be sort of a roughly accurate estimate of how folks are flowing to and from school destinations. And then another piece that kind of jumped out to me, this has been brought up in other efforts, including the Economic Value Atlas and other kind of mappings of the community. is essentially looking at kind of non-residential community assets, and these points of interest sort of were broadly ranging across multiple subject areas, including cultural, economic, food, restorative justice. Perhaps some of this could be derived from business data, perhaps from the IRS, exempt organizations or nonprofit business data, QCEW, ESRI business data, which is backed by Data Axle, and some examples of sort of what those community assets look like: cultural organizations, food access by type, arts-related organizations, churches, social services, other services related to housing, employment, economic development, youth, domestic abuse counseling. And you could see this list kind of growing as you review and sort of evaluate what other pieces of the non-residential social ecosystem are sort of uh, providing a better lens as to what's valuable in a community, and then overlaying that with where we know that people live and who has access to sort of what types or variety of community assets. So that's another kind of, this definitely involves more research to sort of look at what could be possibly pulled out of these various data sets, but that effort is ongoing. Have spent a bit of time already looking at the food access in partnership with the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization on one of their projects, sort of helping consult on that. But more research needed for sure. Perhaps not as related to transportation modeling, but still of interest to myself and others at Metro and perhaps you all in the room. Health equity. So CDC Places publishes data called the Places data at census tract level, which is essentially kind of a modeled approach, a lot of kind of secret CDC sauce on the back end of that in terms of what data sets they're using, but providing estimates for the number of people in a census tract that have asthma, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, COPD, obesity, blood pressure, and some other things as well. So this would be another lens to sort of add on to our general equity lens and understanding again of the communities that we're serving. Housing equity, a big important issue for Metro as we've kind of extended our efforts into the housing realm. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau puts out data by census tract as well, looking at home loans, interest rates, and associated demographic info. So this, again, could sort of get at that harder to measure, longer term process of building intergenerational wealth via property ownership, right? And understanding, how that distributes throughout the region. And then another data set, HUD-CHAS, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy, I think. So that's a custom tabulation of ACS provided by the census to HUD specifically to provide more granularity on housing cost burden split out by tenure, renter or owner, housing conditions, demographics. And so that's one that we've worked with a bit in the past on other housing affordability efforts, but haven't really brought it into the RLIS fold officially. So that's kind of a low-hanging fruit to look at. So that's kind of the overall equity indicator research that we've been going through so far. Just wanted to highlight really quickly a couple of other current Metro equity efforts. SVE 2.0, so the Social Vulnerability Explorer and the development of social vulnerability indices for the region. That was kind of 1.0. It was sort of risk agnostic, so who's vulnerable to any bad thing happening, any disaster, any phase of any disaster. 2.0 is bringing in the specific risk so that the user can specify what is the risk that they're most interested in: urban heat, wildfire risk, etc. Cooling corridors study. There's a lot to this. I'm about to present on a whole bunch of it at the next meeting, but just to put it briefly, identifying distribution of and access to natural areas over the long-term, long-range planning to understand how our region is going to continue to adapt to extreme heat. And online language mapping tool. This is kicking off in 2025 and running through 2026. We have previously done factor one analysis, identifying the top LEP languages in our region about every 3 years, and essentially taking that methodology of joining ACS and Oregon Department of Education data to build an online tool that allows jurisdictions to identify the top languages for themselves as well. And I think that is it. Yeah.